Yeah, thank you very much, dear colleagues. Welcome back from the coffee break. I'm really happy for being able to present you our German approach for controlling the e-commerce of food. If you have wondered about the title ZIELT, it's actually an acronym for a very, very long German name, which basically means Common Central Unit for the Control of Food, Feed, Cosmetics, and some special non-food consumer products. And we're quite happy with that name because it also has a meaning in German. It means something like targeted, and it comes in quite handy because we don't have to say a very, very long name all the time. But not everyone is as happy with that as we are. Just check what we found on Twitter in 2013, shortly after the founding of our central unit. Food security, the new German center, probably a good idea, but a terrible acronym. ZIELT what? So we're amazed to see that. Hopefully in this talk I can convince you that it's not only probably a good idea, but definitely a good idea. And about the acronym, make up your mind. I'm a little bit biased because I'm one of those who came up with the idea. What you need to know, just very, very briefly, in the federal system in Germany, the federal states are in charge of food control. So the inspections, the enforcement, etc., that is taking place on the local level in over 400 local competent authorities. And these local authorities are within 16 federal states. And a decision was made to set up a central unit which takes care of online searches and some other tasks which I will explain you during the presentation. And we have contact points, you can see that here, in all of the 16 federal states. So these are the colleagues that we're talking to, and several of them are also in the audience, which I'm actually very, very happy about. And so, at a glance, our tasks are online searches. We have 3 different types. I will walk you through this during the presentation. We are offering the opportunity for federal states to buy online samples via the central unit or to do test purchases. Since you know from Peter that we have to wait for a couple of more months till the end of the year until we have the legal basis for the anonymous online sampling. We also take care of consumer information because that's a very, very important part of our concept. And last but not least, the cooperation with a large network of stakeholders, which I will talk about at the end of my presentation. Probably our key task, which I would like to talk to you about, are our risk-orientated product searches. That's probably what we are most known for in Germany. We do product searches, usually based on RASCHKE alerts or RAPEX notifications. We look for vendors which are offering their products to German consumers, no matter where they're located. So it could be in Germany, could be in member states, or could be in third countries. And then we identify who's behind that offer and inform the competent authority. And here's just, to make it a little bit more practical, just one example of one of these searches. There was a RASCHKE notification for a sildenafil in a food supplement. That's probably a classic for everyone who's doing online searches. That happens all the time, unfortunately. So we performed a search on that. We found offers for German consumers in Germany and in member states. We informed the ZIELT contact points in the federal states, and we also forwarded the information via our national contact point for the RASCHKE system to the affected member states. And here's just an overview of the follow-up actions. There were on-site inspections, sampling, other RASCHKE follow-up notifications, for instance, from the German federal states, one public warning, and also further investigations, because once in a while we find mailbox addresses, and then you need further searches to identify who's actually behind the offer. Then another case which I would like to share with you, that's from the end of 2017, maybe you heard about that. There was an olive oil fraud case, or most likely you heard about that. And we got the task from one of the federal states to identify the vendors of these olive oils. And that was actually quite challenging. because we thought, how can we identify fraud online? I mean, the task was to identify the brands, and then it's up to the local authorities to check whether it's fraud or not. But we were quite curious if we could find indicators which might sort of give us a hint if it's fraud or not. And one of my colleagues found this label, and he got suspicious. There were some typos in it, and then he checked the GTIN, and he entered it into a GTIN database to see what product is behind it, and he found that product. So apparently someone needed a label very quickly and copied and pasted it together and didn't really take care of what he or she was doing. So there are hints, obviously not all the time, but that's a very interesting indicator that we found. Another example which we had was a case some time ago where we were informed by a German consumer protection center who found an online offer on a selling platform, and they were offering 18 tons of fish, of Victoria perch, in 5-kilogram bags. And the offer was, as you can see here, was placed in December 2017, so that's where the screenshot comes from. And it says in the label, you can't read it, but here it is, the best before date was March to May 2016. So that was a good case for Crossborder cooperation because the offer was not, or the product was not located in Germany, it was located in a different member state, and with the AAC system, that case could be solved. Then we also conduct coordinated control programs on the German level, very similar to what happened in the CCP e-food on the European level. We call that the annual plan. And within this annual plan, we conducted 25 programs, coordinated control programs, with the federal states, for the federal states in Germany since 2014. And we identified over 5,000 vendors, many of which were not known to the competent authorities. And there were also several test purchases performed, and it's a very effective way to get an overview over certain product categories where you don't have a clear objection like you have in the RASCHKE system. So that's a distinction between the product searches and the annual plan programs. And just to give you an overview what products we're facing and looking for, you see here olive oil, fresh meat and fish sold online, social media, honey, counterfeit liquors, bar feed, low-budget jewelry. So it's a broad range of products that we're looking at. The next search types, we're doing a lot of searches, and unfortunately I can't present you any from the field experience because unlike our colleagues who spoke before me, we're hiding behind big computer screens and we're not going outside. So another search that we're doing is the comprehensive search for eFBOs. And the good thing is that search we don't even have to do ourselves. It's done by the colleagues at the Federal Central Tax Office in Germany. And they are not done by an elderly man with glasses. They're done by a web crawler, which runs 24/7 and identifies websites within Germany which are showing entrepreneurial activity. And obviously, they're not doing that only for us. They're doing that to identify tax fraud online. But we have the legal basis to receive the data sets from this web crawler concerning food, feed, and cosmetic vendors. We check them for plausibility, send them to the federal states, and they can check in their local registers of food businesses whether they are registered or whether they need maybe authorization in the field of feed. Okay, and the interesting thing is that we received feedback, and we found out that over 40% of the pure online vendors, so not the multi-channel vendors with a brick and mortar store, just the pure online vendors, 40% of them within Germany were not known to the competent authorities, were not registered as food business operators before we started this approach. And we're doing that for like nearly 7 years now, and that number keeps constant, and that's an indicator. We expected it to sort of decrease after 2 years, but it keeps quite constant. It's probably because it's an assumption, but it's probably because the market is so dynamic that we find vendors all the time. It's really easy to close down a website when you're a vendor. When you're an authority, it's difficult, but to move your website to a different web space. We also, as I mentioned in the beginning, offer the possibility to purchase products for the competent authorities. And I think I don't have to tell you that it comes in pretty handy if you want to get a hold of the product. That's pretty obvious, but it can also help you to identify the vendor who's behind it, or also to check for sales restrictions. We had cases for cosmetic products, tooth bleaching agents, for instance, which had a very high concentration of hydrogen peroxide in the final product, which, according to EU law, are not allowed for free sale to consumers. They are only allowed for sale to dentists. And these sales restrictions you can easily check with a test purchase or, in the future, an online sample. And here's just one example, a brown bear fillet, which we once purchased for a federal state. It's just for the non-Germans in the room. It's not a typical product which we eat in Germany. It's a very specific product. It's probably that's why it was interesting, and it's a good example to show what goals you can actually achieve with a sample or with a test purchase. You can check who's behind that, who's the vendor, is he registered, what's the origin of the product, is the cold chain maintained, what about the labeling, what about the species, is it brown bear, and if, is it maybe subjected to species protection? So these are several questions which you could basically answer with a test purchase. Then we're not only doing searches, because it's, in our opinion, very, very important to allow consumers to make informed choices. I think online searches in such a vast market can only be one piece of the entire thing. An important one and a big one, but you also have to inform consumers how to shop safely online. And we provide certain pieces of information. We provide an annual report every year, which is published on our website. Together with the federal states, we set up a flyer with information for safe online shopping for consumers. We set up a known website, a known demo store where you can play around with as a consumer and find problems with the website and how to identify a potential rogue seller. And we also provide, which is not on this slide, FAQs for vendors with an outline of the most relevant regulations and directive they have to adhere to when they want to sell something online. So it's just the first step for them when they want to open up an online business. And that comes in pretty handy because we're getting a lot of requests from young startups, etc., who write emails to us, oh, we want to set up our shop, what do we have to think about, and are there any regulations? And then we can just forward our FAQs, and the request is answered quickly. We also have a cooperation with trust marks, and that was mentioned earlier this day by Mr. Komans, I think. And we have the cooperation with this trust mark since 2013, and these trust marks have a very high, very strict guidelines for companies who want to get the trust mark as far as economic consumer protection is concerned. But they also agreed to provide this trust mark only to online vendors or online food vendors when they can provide proof that they are registered as food business operator with their local authority. So for us, that's a very important tool for sort of assisting consumers to make an informed choice. And that's why BVL is recommending these trust marks. Cooperation. I think I don't have to tell you how important cooperation is because you're all here for cooperation. And this is just an overview of the different players that we're on a very, very regular basis have contact with. Obviously, our contact points in the federal states, the Commission, other member states, research facilities, social networks, marketplaces. It's really important to maintain this network and to keep it growing to face the challenges that we're all facing. And I would like to provide you with some examples for the cross-border cooperation within the authorities. On this slide, we're very happy about the input that we get from the two major working groups in this field on the European level, the Commission Working Group on e-commerce and the FLAP Working Group on e-commerce. There was the CCP eFood. I don't want to tell too much about it. You probably know, and I think it will be covered tomorrow. There are also BTSF courses on e-commerce since 2014. We made several study visits and had people over for study visits in our office to exchange views on how to effectively control the online market of food. And moreover, and I think that's pretty obvious, the well-established systems, RASFF, AAC, RAPEX, they are also suitable to communicate e-commerce cases. The Commission made that possible about 2 years ago to put these cases into these systems, and it's very, very valuable for the communication among authorities. I would like to give, on my second last slide, one example for the cooperation with marketplaces. We had hopefully you can read it, but I'll walk you through it. We had a case in the RASFF some time ago, a notification on sibutramine in a slimming product. And this was a particular severe case because this product was related to 2 death cases in another member state. So we did a product search. We identified one offer on a marketplace. It was a private seller offering that product, and we found the item location, but we didn't find the address of the vendor. It was within Germany that we knew the federal state, but we didn't know more. So we informed the federal state, and they reacted very quickly. They requested us to contact the marketplace and have this offer deleted. And it took only from the moment when we found the product until the offer was deleted, it took only 4 hours. So for us, that's a very strong signal that if we need this cooperation in that matter, it really works very, very well. Okay. To sum it up, with our central unit, we can bundle expertise and avoid duplication of effort. I think that's, for the system that we have in Germany, a very effective way to deal with online sales of food. And our approach doesn't only consist of online searches. I mean, it's a big piece of the puzzle, but it also deals with registration of eFBOs, with consumer information, networking, further development, automatization processes, etc. But we're not done. It's not that we say, okay, now we have a good system and it will stay like this forever. Of course, we identified future needs. And even though we already have a good cooperation and good international cooperation, it can always be better, especially when we are sort of with our products virtually leaving the European Union. That's one case where there's definitely some place for improvements. Moreover, with the mystery shopping, we have the empowerment in the OCR to do anonymous sampling starting in December 2019. But the online world is evolving, and the payment systems are evolving, and the ways people or consumers do their shopping is evolving. So I'm pretty sure it will be a continuous process where we constantly have to develop new ways to take anonymous samples. It's really easy for consumers, but it's not even closely easy for authorities to establish these methods. So we have to continue working on that. And I think Peter talked to you a lot about Article 14 of the e-commerce directive and the responsibility of marketplaces, for instance, and other internet society service providers to act as soon as they're made aware of a problem on their website. We had a huge discussion about that yesterday, but the current sort of directive that we have, the Article 14 of the e-commerce directive, that applies for marketplaces, but it doesn't apply for payment service providers directly because they don't have a website on which the product is offered. They're just offering a service. And I think we really need a similar regulation also for the payment service providers. And that would go into the direction of maybe revising the e-commerce directive. It's more than 20 years old or nearly 20 years old, and probably it's worth looking at it. And website closure, like anonymous sampling, website closure or the empowerment for website closure is in the new OCR. It's one sentence. You can read it very easily and very quickly, but it's not that easily done. You need specific tools to do it. We have to ask ourselves the question, how do we want to close down a website? Which do we have to delete it physically on the server, which could basically be everywhere? Do we sort of try to talk to providers to disconnect between the URL and the IP address, which is possible via the domain name server, for instance? It's quite complicated, and we also have to check whether the national legislation in all of our member states is sufficient to bring that into practice. Okay, and with this outlook, I'm coming to an end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.